This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome to the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theatre. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which is located on 42nd Street, where Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway all come to present the magic of theatre. These seminars are but one of the programs of the American Theatre Wing, and they are really created to give you an inside view of what it is to work in the theatre. What it is to work in the theatre as a performer, as a playwright, as a producer, as a director, as a costume and set designer, and as an agent as well. The American Theatre Wing is perhaps best known for its Tony Awards, but it wasn't established for that reason. It was established to honor a woman named Antoinette Perry, who strongly believed that you should be prepared for the theatre, and you should be trained for the theatre, and there should be quality in what you do for the theatre. And so the American Theatre Wing's Tony Award is given not for the best or the longest or highest review, but for the achievement of excellence in the craft of theatre. All of the programs that the Wing does has that at its base. We send shows to hospitals and nursing homes and aid centers. We support a program called Saturday Theatre for Children, which brings live professional theatre into their own classrooms on Saturday mornings. We have a program called Introduction to Broadway, which is very exciting, and it has brought thousands and thousands of high school students, students from the local high schools in the 5 boroughs of New York. And this is done along with the cooperation of the New York City Board of Education and the producers, marvelous producers who have given us tickets for Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and Five Guys Named Moe and all the shows that you can possibly think of that young people should see and expose them to live theatre. We also had them meet with the cast and the crew afterwards for a discussion so that they will take part in what it is in working in the theatre and perhaps have a role model for that as well. These seminars grew out of the Wing's school, where returning veterans were able to come back and learn the craft of theatre from one area to another. And our stage door canteens, which is famous all over the world as part of the wonderful quality that performers have and gave to people who were not in the theatre but were part of a large group that were going overseas, and it meant a great deal to them to see live theatre and be with people in the theatre. Out of that came a hospital program. Again, all the programs came out of the idea that we should serve the theatre through the community, and we continue to do that to this day. I'd like to introduce our co-moderators, Jean Dalrymple, who is an author, a director, a wearer of many hats, and a member of the board of directors of the American Theatre Wing, and Brendan Gill, who is an author and a critic and believes strongly in tradition and landmarks, and is also a member of the board of directors of the American Theatre Wing. And they, in turn, will introduce this wonderful panel of performers to you today. Thank you for being here.
Farthest from me on my right is Julie Harris, who plays the smoldering mother in the play The Fiery Furnace. And next is Joe Mantello, who is both a director and an actor and is now playing in the role of Louis Ironston in Angels in America. And directly next to me is Petula Clark, who is making her Broadway debut in that most vehement play, Blood Brothers.
And on our left bank, we have some very important and darling people. Stephen Spinella is way down at the end, and he's making his debut on Broadway, as well as playing a very important part in Angels in America. Mr. Spinella, take a bow, please.
Just take a bow.
Then we have next to him the famous David Cassidy.
As opposed to the other one.
All the Cassidys are very famous. And the whole family once worked for me at City Center here in New York. And they were tremendously successful. And I'm so happy to see young David again.
Thank you.
And right next to me, we had a little confusion because of some of our dear friends being late. And so these are apt to be out of order. But you're Mr. Heslop, is that right? Yes. Jeff Heslop. I had a lot of trouble learning even how to say that. Heslop, currently playing the part of Molina in Kiss of the Spider Woman. Mr. Heslop.
Thank you.
Just to begin with, how many generations of Cassidys have been on the stage? Is this second, third?
This is just the second. My father, in 1953, I watched, I was 3 years old at the time. This is true confessions. I'm here to tell you that I became an actor because I watched my father, Jack Cassidy, in, I think it was 1953, in a play called Sandhog at the Phoenix Theater, I believe. I saw him in not every production that he did. He did 37 Broadway shows. And I was, at the time growing up, I lived in New Jersey. My parents had split up, and I had felt like most young boys that are separated from their fathers, I really longed to see him, and I revered him both as a father, but also as a performer. He had such tools and such gifts as a singer, as an actor, as a comedian. He was so skilled, and in fact was not formally trained. He was trained through coming up in the old days. They used to do lots and lots of shows. He did a lot of work in the chorus. He did a lot of bit parts, and he, I think, learned from an awful lot of the, I think, the pool of talent that was here in the theater in New York at the time in the 40s when my mother and he met. My mother was also an actress and a singer and a dancer, and she herself did about 30 shows. From the time I can remember breathing, I knew I wanted to do this. And in fact, my parents, after I saw my dad on the stage in 1953, to make a long story even longer, I decided I would be an actor. And being 3 years old, my parents said to me in the car and in the tunnel on the way back, "Okay, but you have to graduate from high school." So, in 1968, 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, fresh out of my drama class, I began working with the Los Angeles Theater Company and became an actor. And about 9 months later, I got my first professional job right here in New York on Broadway. So.
Well, now your brother Sean.
My brother Sean, who is
in Blood Brothers with you.
He's also in Blood Brothers. Yes.
And you have a couple of other brothers. Are they professional?
Yes. In fact, we were just talking about the show Company. My brother Patrick has done 3 or 4 Broadway shows himself. Blood Brothers is, in fact, my 3rd Broadway show. It's my brother Patrick just did Company in at Long Beach with Carol Burnett, although I didn't get to see it because we're here doing Blood Brothers. I heard it was sensational. And he's talking about coming and moving back here, and I think the theater is certainly his first love. My brother Ryan is not an actor. He actually is he's in business. He works for Jim Henson Productions as a production
Is this
coordinator.
the picture that's turned to the wall in your family?
In fact, we're all we applaud him for his choice and his direction in his life and his career. It's a difficult profession for lots of reasons, but an extraordinarily rewarding profession. And I'm sure that you'll hear from my very distinguished cohorts up here in crime about perhaps the process of doing it, which is really exciting for me to be here and to be a part of it with all of them. Because I learn every day that I'm on the stage and on the theater and working and getting to talk and to share what the process is that we go through to get there, to do it every night, 6 nights a week or 6 days a week, 8 performances. The commitment and the responsibility that we have to ourselves and to the craft is wonderful. And let me pass the ball to someone else.
Well, Miss Harris, for example, you don't come from a professional acting family, but your family didn't object to you going into acting.
No, because both, I always remember there was an interview Dick Cavett had with Lord Olivier, and Laurence Olivier said that his mother and father, his father was a minister and his mother loved the theater, and he inherited the wish from the two of them. And I think I've always felt that I inherited that from my mother and father. My father at Yale University was in the Yale Dramat and was a tumbler and loved the theater, loved Shakespeare. And my mother adored the theater and always went, and they took my brothers and I to the theater in Detroit when touring shows were going through. So I did inherit that wish, and there was something that they gave me, because when I saw plays, I was reminded, I went to see Farewell My Concubine, and that is students who are being trained for the Chinese opera. And there is a scene when the little boys come to see the opera for the first time, and they start to cry because they see something that they feel they belong to. This magic, this, where it's just a building, a stage, an actor comes out in a costume. It's something you feel that is part of you, that you want to be part of. It's this storytelling, it's this communion with other people. And I certainly inherited that wish, because I would walk into an empty theater and start to cry. I'll sweep the floors, wash the ceiling, I'll do anything to be here.
Was your father in Monty Woolley's time at Yale?
Yes, he was, yes.
He must have been an inspiring figure to get everybody stirred up in
Yes,
those days.
absolutely. It's the ideas, it's the magic, it's the communication.
When you got the Tony, I had the honor of handing it to you. Do you, by any manner of means, remember that? It was in 1952, and I think it was your first part on Broadway.
It was the Member of the Wedding, I think, then, 52,
Yes.
I think.
That's right.
It was all.
You can deny anything you like.
No, it was a wonderful blur, but those plays. I mean, you know, the plays that I have been so fortunate to have been in something like The Member of the Wedding, which was such magical writing and a perfect sort of blend of William Hanson and myself and the great Ethel Waters and Brandon DeWilde, and being directed by Harold Clurman. I mean, it was such a dream. I remember Harold was a great leader, and he loved the theater with that passion that was just sort of overwhelming. And I remember Ethel Waters, who I had seen in Mamba's Daughters and Cabin in the Sky as a youngster, and I thought there was no one like her on the face of the earth. I don't think there was. And she said to Harold, she had a speech about Ludi Freeman, Ludi Maxwell Freeman, the man that she lived with and who was the great love of her life. And it was a long speech about his dying. And she said to Harold, I don't know how to do that. And I thought, she doesn't know how to do it. And Harold put on his she said, would you read it for me? And Harold put on his spectacles and read this speech. Now, he said, you're telling the children a story from the Bible. And she latched onto that immediately. But then it was very extraordinary because, to me, watching her, I would say to Ethel, I wasn't any good tonight. She said, honey, baby, you just got to have faith. I said, well, where do you get that? In what drugstore can I buy a bottle of faith? And she said, that'll come. But it was remarkable watching her because she would say, and I lay on Ludi and I put my arm, and the minute she put her arms out, the tears would stream down her face. And it was so overwhelming. And that never, for the year and a half that we did it together, those arms would go out, and it was just amazing. And I thought, well, that's what
She was really listening to herself.
Yes, and living it.
Yes, and living as well.
And it was extraordinary. So I have been very fortunate.
Julie, the tears ran down your cheeks that night when you got the Tony. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember the opening night of the member of the wedding. That was, I think, the most extraordinary time at the old Empire Theater. It was so beautiful. And the curtain came up on us holding hands, and I was frightened for a moment because I heard such a roar. It was like standing at the edge of Niagara Falls, which I always felt Ethel possessed in her side of her. She was like a natural phenomenon to me. But it was the roar of approval. And we had just been in Philadelphia and sort of limped through that engagement, came to New York. There was no advance sale. And we immediately knew it was going to be okay. Somehow.
Can I ask a question of your... when you just said something to me that triggered the thought, and the first time I stood on a Broadway stage as an actor, a professional, I was 18. And I can remember I was in the very first scene, 9 months out of high school, and the curtain went up, and I was concentrating so desperately on trying to keep enough saliva in my mouth so I could part my lips, so I could get the first word out. And I thought, if I could just get the first word out, I would be able to get on with this piece. And I found my heart was racing. Sorry about that. My heart was racing. Forget about these mics. And what you just triggered in me, I felt my whole body go, and I think it's sometimes that we actors feel with each other that somehow it's not okay to be frightened, to be afraid. Other actors in this play, in Blood Brothers, said to me the night we opened, so are you terrified? Are you scared? And I said, no, I'm really excited.
Yeah.
And I'm nervous, but I'm not terrified or scared because I've gone a little bit beyond the terror. But I was just wondering if in 1952, when you were standing there, and if you had felt that sense of, oh my God, I'm actually doing this. This is actually happening.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But as you say, the terror I hate to be afraid.
Oh, yeah.
I like to be excited and a little on edge.
Yeah.
But I hate the terror.
Oh, God.
And,
We all.
and I am past that. I think.
Yeah, thank God.
Did you feel the terror, or did you feel just the excitement?
I have felt
David?
the terror. And
We
that,
all
that,
have.
that can paralyze you. I mean, I come out in a rash and spend a lot of time in the bathroom. But thank goodness I seem to be over that now. But it is important to be frightened, I think, before you go on stage. It's almost like a dog having a wet nose, you know, it's a sign of good health. Sometimes if I feel that I'm not on edge, I know that there's something wrong with me. I'm not on form.
But your play is so full of strength and excitement, and all that whole thing, so you must all be very keyed up in that play.
We're keyed up, yes, we've all got, we're all fighting sore throats and colds at the moment as well, but it's, well, you know, the first time on Broadway, I was near terror on the first night, because I also didn't think I was right for it, and that's a strange feeling. You know, this is the first role I've ever played where I really didn't think I was right for it.
Well, then how did you find the courage to say, yes, I'll do it?
I don't know, it was just one of those moments, you know, I thought, oh, well, yes, I'll have a go at it, you know, which was, it's not very professional, I suppose, but there comes a moment, but there comes a moment when you have to say, okay, you know, you have to hold your nose and do it. And no, I was very excited about being on Broadway, of course.
But David speaks of being able to act on Broadway right out of high school. Now, did you go onto the stage right after high school? Or the equivalent
I didn't go to
of
high school. I hardly went to school, actually. I was a child prodigy in England. I'm English.
Yes, you did.
And,
you were born in Epsom, where the salts come from.
Well, yes, and they have the Derby, you know.
Very dark.
And I'm not from a showbiz family. My father had always wanted to be an actor. He was a very handsome man. He looked like Errol Flynn. And he was, in fact, bitten by an Errol Flynn fan.
What a face. I hope the bite
Roll that one by us
wasn't
again.
He treasured it for a long time.
He survived the bite. Not a rabid fan.
But he was not allowed to go on the stage. It was something rather shocking in those days, I suppose. And so he vowed that if he ever had a child who did show any sign of talent, that he would encourage that child, and that was me. But I used to sing around the house, and I started when I was about 6.
Mm-hmm.
I went to see Flora Robeson in a play, I think it was Mary Tudor, and I came back on the top of the bus, and I was just sort of in a dream, and my father said, what are you thinking about? And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be an actress. But in fact, I started out as a singer. During the war in England, I was singing for the troops, and then I was put under contract to the Rank Organisation as an actress, and I made a lot of mostly bad movies. 1 or 2 good ones, with Alec Guinness and a few other good people. But I've done very little theatre, and I don't know, I feel a bit like an imposter here. I don't call myself an actress. You know, I'm a singer who acts a bit, but...
Oh, you're a wonderful actor.
What? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But how do you feel about the American audience? Did that give you any more terror or excitement facing them for the first time?
Well, I was...
With Mother England, for example?
There is a difference. I can't quite put my finger on that. And there's a difference in the cast. I have to say that, you know, there's a kind of bite to a Broadway cast that you don't get anywhere else in the world. I don't quite know where that's coming from. I think the energy level, professionalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you've worked in...
Well, I just did 4.5 months of KISS in London, and I've just come in here to New York, so it's... The difference is quite astoundingly...
But what is the difference?
Well, we want more, don't we?
It's very, very responsive here in New York, and there's an excitement in the community, I think, from the restaurants, from the hotels, from the people, from, you know, anybody. They're very proud of this Broadway community, and that filters down so that you feel like you're supported all the time, and that you're encouraged. And that's the hardest thing of being an actor, is it's
You're also a director. How do you get that excitement into your performance?
I think just because I feel I was born with this excitement that I started out as a gymnast and a dancer and so I was very physical early on in my life, and that's always been a part of there's a certain joie that I love to get
Also,
people.
these stories are very powerful. I mean, you get caught up in
Absolutely.
Yes.
in what you're feeling.
And you wonder, though, when you're playing, for instance, Kiss, it's many, many emotional levels.
Yes.
And you wonder how an audience, for instance, in London, they sit and they're just absolutely silent. And you think, are they speaking the same language? What am I doing here? And then at the end, they erupt.
Yeah.
Right.
Here, they're laughing and crying and oohing and awing all the way through, and then they erupt. So it's just a different containment. It's still the same appreciation level.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Stephen, are you finding that with Angels? So the response of the audience,
British
think,
and I didn't do it in British. So
no, but I mean in terms of here, of continuous response
well, we
from
just
the audience.
we haven't played for very much of October, but last night we played, and we could feel a real marked difference between what's happening now and what was happening in August. And I think what we discovered last night was that in October, a lot of New Yorkers start going back to the theater, and consequently, I mean, I have nothing against people from out of town, but they're much more sedate. I don't think that they know that they can respond in the way that New Yorkers feel like they don't care whether they're allowed to or not. They will. And
You're right.
And the thing is that what happens is that level of excitement in the audience increases the level of excitement on the stage, and actors. Perhaps it's a little bit the ham in all of us. We rise to the occasion, and we give a little bit more, and things just build. And last night was just an astonishing performance. And
How
after
long had it been before you came to last night? How long had you not played?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
But to say why, you're also rehearsing.
Well, we're rehearsing the second half.
The second half.
The two-part play.
Yes.
And we just did the first preview on Saturday night.
Yeah.
That was an extraordinary thing. I mean, to talk about an audience response is that we sort of weren't ready, and the play is like 10 hours long, and we were all thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? And George Wolfe and Tony Kushner, before the show started, walked out onto the stage in front of this huge red curtain, and the audience erupted in cheers and applause, and they made a short little curtain speech, and again the audience just erupted, and we were like, and in some strange way, it was like it was going to be okay. They were saying, we're here, if we're here till 1 o'clock in the morning, we're here.
And they were.
Had that kind of reaction taken place in June and July?
In a different way. This was like a soap opera. This was like people coming to see the second part of a soap opera, so they were really geared up, and they were just like, what happens?
Yeah.
So,
we're talking about the difference between the first play and the
That's
second
right,
play,
yeah. I realize that.
they were incredibly excited. And July and August were. It's funny, you do it 8 times a week, and you feel exhausted about doing it 8 times a week, and it takes everything you have to do it 8 times a week. But there is nothing like doing it 8 times a week. You learn more about. You learn more about that play and that character than you will possibly ever even want to know.
Absolutely.
And it becomes. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in Cats, and it becomes. And then we went down to 4 performances a week after that, because we were in rehearsal for Perestroika, and I was talking about the difference, and I said that I think that the important part was that doing it 8 times a week, you get so comfortable in doing it that you feel like it's almost like jazz. You can improvise, that there's a quality of the lines are there. The lines become this superstructure. They aren't these minute things anymore. They're this superstructure that you exist very subtly inside of. And when you do it 8 times a week, you have that facility to do that. And when you do it 4 times a week, you begin to lose that, and you start, you know, the lines become these, not obstacles, but they become more these objects, these larger things that you have to tackle, and you can't be as, you don't have the facility that you had when you were doing it 8 times a week.
Or the fluidity that gets on.
The fluidity, exactly.
The desperateness.
Well, sometimes it can be. I mean, and so now
How are you playing now, from now on?
well, now we're doing, well, tonight we do Perestroika, the second play, which will be the second time it's done. And now, I mean, for me, I at this point in working on a play, everything I think about acting becomes about taking what I learned in rehearsal and transferring it into a performance mode. And you have to go from a rehearsal mode into a performance mode, and it really becomes about very much listening to the audience and having them tell me what to do in a way that I don't know how much better to articulate it than that, but if you listen to an audience, they'll tell you how much they already know and how much more they need to know. And then sometimes if you're lucky, you'll know how much more to give them and what to withhold so that they'll stay interested. And that becomes about what the performance is as opposed to the rehearsal. And that is sort of the mindset that I'm in right now with Perestroika.
It's the first time we really had this discussion of how much an audience gives to the performer. Do you feel that way, Joe?
Oh, absolutely. I directed a play this year called 3 Hotels at Circle Rep, in which it was 3 monologues. And when we would rehearse, when the actors and I would rehearse, there was only a certain amount of work that we could do, because I would say to them, well, essentially we're preparing for the first night when your scene partner shows up, which is the audience, because they will tell you, because you have to play the scene with them. Because if you're talking at them, it becomes uninteresting at a certain point. So the first 2 weeks that they were playing it, it was all about, okay, now what is my partner doing? And they had to learn how to dance with the audience. So I think it's crucial. It's
nice
essential.
phrase.
It was a wonderfully directed play.
Yes,
Great
wonderful.
job you did on that. Wow, it was just great. And it was all that happening. And of course, the size of the theater helps.
Yeah.
But I think with KISS, one of the troubles is at the beginning the audience is perturbed to know where it is in relationship to where its sympathies are going to go, anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's a very hard thing to get over at the very beginning.
And to understand that we're trying to create a certain tension immediately when that iris opens, that you're in prison, that there's something going on, and that and it's a wonderful, like talking about audiences. One night we'll have a large group of bus people come in from wherever, Arkansas or whatever, and they don't know how to react. They are totally naive, and because they watch TV and they get up and they go to the refrigerator and they come back.
Right.
And so you're dealing with that, and they sit there not knowing, and they don't react. And then a New York audience will come in, and you'll wonder, God, I mean, this is great.
Well, New York audiences don't need a laugh track. They don't need a laugh track to be told.
They create their own.
But isn't it also very important when we're talking about the summer? And I'm glad we're having a chance to talk about this, because I'm getting to hear different other actors, their take on audiences. I have found it from time to time in being in different plays or productions, it being frustrating, and you expect in the framework of a play a certain amount of reaction every night. You go out and you play the play. What you were talking about, the bones of the play, the skeleton of the play, when you do it 8 times a week, you get so comfortable with it that you be able to become the flesh of the character. And the lines are really kind of like the bones. So you have an opportunity to really do a lot with it. I sometimes wonder, when you get used to, in the beginning of a play, Blood Brothers in particular, when we came into it, there was a lot of support from, I guess, people that were excited about seeing us in this play. And the first week or so, we got used to hearing it all happen that way. It was around the summer, and I guess a lot of the New York audiences. Then people from out of town came in, and our job changed because what we heard from the audience was different. And I think you're absolutely right in saying, because we watch, as Americans, we watch so much television, we get used to sort of seeing it come to us, and we don't have to respond. We can go to the refrigerator, we can do whatever it is. And in a sense, a lot of people have said to me they've come to the theater for the first time in New York and didn't know, well, what is Blood Brothers? I mean, I've heard that it's really funny. It is funny. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, am I supposed to laugh, or is it all right for me? Should I be quiet? Somehow or another, being in New York, seeing a play for the first time, I think, enables those people that you're talking about to get a sense of what the experience is, which is the audience does participate and contributes greatly to what we do. And it's really important. I sometimes have a tendency, which is, I think it's not a good thing for me as an actor and as part of this company. I tend to push a little more when it's like you hit a ball against a wall, and if it doesn't fly back at you, you hit it harder. And then it doesn't fly back at you, so you hit it harder again, and in the end, you're screaming. Yeah. That doesn't work. What actually is a very important thing to learn, and I've learned this in playing this character, because I come out as a 7-year-old in Liverpool with a Liverpudlian accent. And a lot of people who know my work from something else, either from television or films or other things I've done,
a little surprised,
are a little shocked. The first time you see me, I sense their, you know, and it's important for me instantly to make them feel comfortable about being there. I have Willie Russell is a very fine playwright who wrote the play, enables me as this character, Mickey, to sit down with the audience after a moment or two as the audience is staring with their mouths dropped, and I have about a 5-minute little monologue, which I tell a poem. And it's in those 5 minutes that the audience gets set up for what the play is, and that you have a chance. I either lose them or I win them, because I either embrace them and do the dance with the audience, or else if you talk at them and you try and convince them that this is the way it's going to go, you're dead. Mm-hmm. And I have made the fatal mistake. And it only took me one time.
That's what we're talking about here, is that training and being professional. Mm. How do you know how to do the dance with the audience? How do you know? And this is really a
it's very subtle.
What do you bring to it, and where do you get it?
It's
that
a subtle
you bring
sort of
to your
sense.
Performance, listening to the audience and working and knowing that you have to stretch yourself a little more fully. Where does that come from? What kind of training have you had to bring it?
But all of you as actors are talking partly as if you were directors, and it's interesting that you have done both and are doing both. Now, is this something new in the theater, or is this always going on, that actors have wanted to be directors or have become directors? I was mentioning before that, for example, George Abbott, who is now 106 and has been a director for the last 50 or 60 years, but he began as an actor 75 years ago and then switched over.
Yeah, he is.
But Stephen, even you're talking part like a director as well.
Well, I mean, the director is a new construction. I mean, directors didn't come about until the turn of the century. I mean, you really didn't have, in the 1860s, the lead actor was the director, and everyone just sort of like didn't get in his way, and everybody directed themselves. And so, so it's still embedded in the craft of acting that, in a funny way, you have to be a director, and the director doesn't tell you every move to make. I mean, you make your own decisions. You decide very much yourself what you're going to do with your character, unless the director has a strongly different opinion. You do what you what your impulse is.
Well, you become your own director.
And
really,
you become your own director.
Yeah.
I think you
in
come
large part.
absolutely prepared.
And Gielgud said, you know, the only way to direct a play is to hire the best actors you can get and let them do it. And
How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel in order to, what you were talking about, to bring something that the audience will participate in the first place. The first time I ever did the poems and letters of Emily Dickinson, before The Belle of Amherst was written by William Luce, I did a play of my own, putting together in chronological order the letters and the poems. And I did it for a church benefit at the Booth Theatre. And I had no idea how it would go, except that I know that I was so excited about saying these words. And it was a little like evangelism for me in that moment, because I wanted them to love her as much as I did. And I knew they would if they just heard these. So, I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. I mean, just knocks me out. And I always thought it would knock somebody else out. And so I had my own vision of this lady, and that was the first impulse. I mean, it was this strong desire to make someone else aware of what she was. Mm-hmm. And I feel that in other characters. I mean,
did you feel the audience responding to this desire?
Oh yes. Oh.
Had they not, what would you have done?
Suicide.
I would have. Well, it wasn't in the realm of possibility.
All right. What a nice attitude to have. But a good attitude.
And Stephen, you're very young. How many years have you been on the stage professionally?
Professionally? Not
How did it all begin?
I went to graduate school at NYU, mm-hmm. and then had 5 years out of graduate school struggling, which means that I didn't do very much of anything. And then...
What were you doing while you were struggling?
Waiting on tables, and catering, and working with Tony Kushner, actually. Tony Kushner was... Tony and I met at NYU, and he was writing plays, and I was and writing me parts, and he was my training school after school. I mean, it's funny because when I was at NYU, I came to one of these seminars, and Ian McKellen was here, and I was telling Joe this, and Ian McKellen said something that I'll never forget. He said, the most important thing is not to have a great part. The most important thing is to have a great director, and then the next most important thing is to work with great actors. And then the next most important thing is to do a great play. And then the next most important thing is to have a great part. And I thought, you know, that was sort of what my years with Tony Kushner was like. He has an incredibly powerful mind for the theater.
Very fortunate.
And I was working with him, and he was writing extraordinary roles for me. And you know, I mean, so I had, you know,
you had the English experience,
yeah, and
right here in New York.
And so, so that was pretty much my training ground after training school, and waiting on tables and that sort of stuff, and then really my career started. I mean, I started working before my career started, but somebody once said to me, you don't have a career until you're on Broadway and you get a film offer, and you have to choose. Then you have a career. and I, you know, I mean, at that point, you know, I mean, so by that, I really don't even have a career. So,
I think that's interesting to go on with it.
But anyway, so I've only really been, I've been an equity actor, I think, for 7 years now.
As many young actors and actresses do wait on tables, and I notice again and again, this is one of my obsessions, that so many of the waiters and waitresses are left-handed. And whenever I say, oh, you're left-handed, you're an actor, you're an actress, because it seems to me a high percentage of actors and actresses are left-handed.
George Wolfe is left-handed, actually. George Wolfe is left-handed.
And when you go to the movies, go on stage, you say, look, left-handed, picking up the phone, doing all that left-handed. I can hardly watch anything for days in this particular aspect, because actors are supposed to be, among other things, intuitive about how things are going from one moment to the next, rather than they can't afford to be analytical on stage. But how many left-handed people here?
Well, there's your theory.
Miss Garrett, how do you feel about that? How about this audience reaction and how to find them?
Oh well, the audience reaction is very important, but it's a very delicate thing because, as David said, there's a bit of a ham in a lot of us anyway, and if we mustn't work too much to the audience, I think we have to keep some kind of inner discipline as well, And all of this is very, very personal. I find it very difficult to talk about acting because I'm not a trained actress. I don't know, are you all trained? Did you go to school and acting school and things like that? Well, I never did. I never did, so I don't have that basic training, and I'm learning all the time. And so I have to keep that discipline inside me. I do a lot of concerts, I'm a singer, and so I'm used to working with an audience. But working in concerts, of course, is really sort of eyeball to eyeball, actually working to the audience, and that's very different to working in a play. You have to be aware, but not too aware. It's keeping that sort of balance, which is very difficult and delicate, and I think very interesting. That's what I do.
When you what Steve said was so interesting about what you can withhold from an audience, which will then increase the tension. Now, you as a director actor, did you try to do that, or you were saying with the other thing with the 3 hotels that you had to marry these two things, but the art of withholding. Now, what would be an example of how you would do that?
I think that good acting is about listening. Sort of what Stephen was saying, and if you listen to the people that are around you, and also you have this sense of what's going on over here, they will tell you. I don't understand the story that you're telling. You have to be clearer. So the next night, maybe you make it a little bit clearer. Or as a director, when you're sitting there in previews, and yes, you're watching the actors on stage, but you're also listening to the audience, and then you start to build from that, and that's what I think previews are about. And if the audience is going for their candy then something's not getting, something's not traveling. And if they're silent and you can hear a pin drop, then it's working. And then there are gradations between that. But so it's about finding.
Sort of
and in some ways, especially when you start dealing with emotional issues, when you start dealing with, this character is very upset in this scene, and just how upset is this character? And the lines let you know to a certain degree to what degree of extremis they're in. But you go out there and you can produce the affect. You can produce it, but the audience will let you know how much they want to produce for themselves. And I have a long speech in the first act of the first play, and I found that if I present to them too much affect, if I give them too much of an emotional life, they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to hear it because the speech is very complicated and very subtle. If I am very simple and just do it very simply, they'll listen. They'll pay very, very close attention, and they'll fill in the blank. They'll fill in the affect. And that's what I mean by listening to the audience, I guess that's the best.
It's also this play, Angels in America, presents a sort of a unique problem in that now, all total, the play is, I don't know,
Seven hours.
6.5. 7 hours. And so you don't want to come out in the first scene and give your entire performance. Or there's
a long way to go.
Yeah. So that's a unique sort of problem that I've never had to deal with before. So that's what Stephen, I think you mean about withholding a bit.
What I was getting, you're all talking about this is anybody can listen to the audience, and anybody knows when to pull back and not pull back, or to give more. I want to know how you know how to listen to an audience. What do you bring to that? Obviously, the answer is you're a professional.
Training.
But there's another level there, not everyone. What is it that you... What is it that you can pass on to tell me?
I mean, David sort of said it when he said, experience on the stage. I mean, you just... To a certain degree, it is experience. I mean, and I'm
not
sure
experience you learn
Julie
at
can
school,
tell us
but
more about
experience
that.
that you get through working on stage and in many parts and with many directors.
And failure also helps. Once you, trust me, I've had a lot of that. I think that my dad told me this. In fact, he said, I never really learned anything about the successes I had. It was all the failures and the flops I was in that I really learned what didn't work and why it didn't work. I learned, okay, I know if I go down this road, that's a dead end. And emotionally, when you were just speaking about, there's an arc to everything, performance, play, and as actors, we are, in a sense, directors. We must, you see the play as an actor, your character has a thread to tell the story. We are communicators. We communicate the essence and the body of whatever it is that we're doing here in the play. My job is to go out and I carry a certain amount of information, but when the play starts to go in the second act of this play, when it starts to go down, when my character's life goes down, it takes everybody with me. My mother, my twin brother's family, and him and his life, my wife, all of them go down. I've experienced going too far too soon to where in the last scene, when it is really the climax of the piece occurs, if you've already sort of spent yourself and emotionally done it, there's nothing left. The audience can't really feel because they've already lived it with you before. So there's a certain amount of restraint that occurs that you must consciously try and kind of like withhold. It's kind of a little bit what we were talking about before, where you push too hard if they're not responding. I found I've been more successful by being simpler, by being less trying to communicate, less emotionally. Also, I think that there's something that maybe we can all explore a little bit within each other, because we all have different methodology in which, through training, through various types of training, I've worked with the LA Theater Company and done some work with them in my early stages, and I still go back to class sometimes. As recently as last year, I was in class for a few months. I think it's a good thing for me to keep sort of sharp. And
What kind of a class?
Larry Moss is an acting teacher and coach, and has now in Los Angeles and was here in New York for quite a long time, and was an actor. And you work with other actors and you do plays or you do monologues, or if I have a problem with a piece of work that I'm doing, I'll call Larry and say, hey, I got this piece I want you to read. Will you read it and give me your thoughts on it? And sometimes he'll just say something to me. If he'll read it and say, well, it's this. And I'll go, oh yeah, of course, I knew that. and if anything, it's my own sense of just the way I get to it. It takes me sometimes a long time to figure out, get the focus on the character that I'm playing. And maybe it's because I haven't done enough work, or I haven't worked in rep or whatever it is, but me, David, I take a while before I really, I can say the words and I can hear, but it's like there's music in the ear. and you can hear the voice, you know the way he moves, you know the way he, and somehow or another, I take a while before I see it, kind of like focusing a camera on who the guy is, or who the character is that I'm playing. And I know that all of us go through it differently.
I think that's important to see how you all feel. Jeff?
Yeah, very much so. I've been doing this for about 7 months now, overall. And just last week, something opened up. And it's just a case of, as you were saying, doing 8 shows a week. And I'm not joking, when you do get to the 8th show, you're a little desperate. And that's good, because it puts you on, I mean, you're literally holding on with your fingernails, and you find stuff because of that desperate quality, and you're out there and you're exhausted. So when you're exhausted, I tend to be very open and very, well, this is what you're going to get tonight. You know, it's, you know, so it's real. It's real. And I find, like, I have this wonderful scene where I'm eating this food that's poisoned. Well, I couldn't find this way to approach this very funny line to cover my fear, knowing I was eating poison. And it just went, boing, look at the food. It's right in front of you. And it just, months I've been looking, how do I?
What brought that sudden thing?
Well, it was one of those.
All the months that you have been doing it, and finally?
At that point, you are so comfortable with the structure, with the words, so they're not in the way anymore. So I could just go, oh, look, I'm eating poison. And it became, it was absolutely, came out of my mouth like and I went, thank you.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's a strange, and it just dropped. But that's wonderful. Just the repetition.
What about you, Petula? Do you feel the same thing?
Oh, totally, yes. Absolutely. I don't have anything as sort of precise as that, but the more I play this role, the more I know about her, and the more I know about myself, funnily enough. It's because it's all coming out from very deep inside me. But it's true, you have to know the words and the moves so perfectly so that you can start reaching inside yourself.
What's your method, Joe?
Oh, God. Well, I think I have, like, anti-technique or something. I don't... and I think it's specific to... you know, I don't have a way of working in specific case-to-case to whatever the play is. You know, I sort of, for a while, I tried to do that thing where you hold the coffee cup, you know, and you imagine, do you know what I'm talking about, where you sort of imagine, and I just never got it. I just thought, well, there'll be coffee. I mean, I'll be okay. So it seemed like a waste of time for me. So I have no words of wisdom other than,
this is not a waste of time, ever. In other words, I just have to stop you, and we're coming back to this because we're going to have to take a break now. And we'll come right back to more of this. Everybody, stand up, turn around your seats, take a deep breath, and come right back again. Stand up while we'll continue this wonderful discussion. We're back at the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater. And these seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. This is a seminar on performance and how the performers react to the audience and what the audience gives to the performer as they're working. It's been a most exciting and interesting story of the audience and the performer. That the audience is part of the performance is, I think, what has come out of this. And I'd like to continue this around the table here and with these marvelous performers that are here today. Brendan, would you like to do this?
I'd like to ask Ms. Harris about the fact that she probably more than anybody here has crisscrossed the country. You know more with more times back and forth.
Yes, well, Brendan, I was going to think, I've always grown up in the theater with the theory that the audience is never wrong. That if the audience isn't responsive, it's not their fault, it's mine. And I was in Peter Shaffer's play recently on tour, Lettuce and Lovage, and it's an extraordinary play. I played Lettuce to Faye, which is an extraordinary part, and we came to Florida. Now, the first scene is the Lettuce is a tour guide in an old house, and she comes on, she says, now this is the most remarkable feature of Fustian House. This is the grand staircase constructed in 1560 out of Tudor oak. As if that was going to fascinate everybody. And usually the speech is so, you know, she's trying to make the most out of these dull facts, because it's really a very uninteresting house. And what makes that first scene thrilling and amusing to the audience is that she realizes she gets fed up with just these boring facts and starts to embellish them. And but we came to Florida, and there wasn't a sound. There wasn't a laugh. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know what because this is the funniest, you know, construction of it. The whole idea is so funny. So, out of desperation, I said, we called Peter in London, and I said, is it all right if I say, now this is the final room of our tour. We come now to the most remarkable feature of Fustian House. This is the grand staircase. Still, I thought maybe they don't know it's a tour. And then I realized, I said, it's your fault. And you have to make it, maybe you're very used to the sound of it and the way you're doing it. And so it became harder for me to think of what I could say to make it more interesting. And when I made that discovery, when I really did that, this grand staircase, the Queen tripped and she fell and he came up, and in other words, the audience could see me working to make the whole story more interesting. And then they started to respond to it.
Exactly.
So I thought I could go on saying something, it's not you, it's not me, it's you. Why aren't you getting this? No, I said, no, it's me. I'm doing, maybe it's too facile, I'm used to doing it. And so I struggled and struggled and finally got it.
But would you call that adjusting to the audience? Or, you know, adjusting your performance to the audience?
Well, not my performance, I mean, not the essence of what she was, but that particular thing was, it was so fascinating to me.
We've been talking about the audiences in New York being different from the audiences that are made up of people who come to New York.
But I find that a funny play is funny all over the country. The line is brilliantly conceived by a wonderful writer, and it almost invariably gets a laugh.
What did Peter Schaffer say when you put the question?
He said, "You're very bright. You're very bright to do that."
The perfect author. The perfect author.
Anything you like, he said. And I said, there was another interesting line, oh my, and Lettuce had a mother who went to France and had a French company, all female, doing Shakespeare. So she is bilingual. And the oh my, I could imagine what Maggie Smith, who did the part in the beginning and did it here in New York, did with oh my. I couldn't do it. I couldn't find a laugh on oh my, and I felt it should, because it's a button of a scene. So I said, I remembered, I went to a French lady to have a massage, and she said, were you Valine's mother in Knots Landing? And I said, yes, and she said, ooh la la. So at the end, I thought, that's what I should say, ooh la la. And then it was the right button. And I said to Peter, is it okay? He said, if it gets a laugh, it's fine. Great.
We're about to go to questions from the audience now, so would you please come up with your first question? And who would you?
My name is Kathy Lilly, and I have a question for Joe Mantello. How has rehearsing Perestroika affected your performance with Millennium approaches? What are the problems and advantages?
before we went into rehearsal for Perestroika, the play only went to the point where the angel, I don't know who's seen it, but the angel comes in at the end. So your performance is, like David was talking about, the arc of your performance is from your first scene to the moment where the angel drops, and that's all of the information that you have. And the day that we started to go into rehearsal for Perestroika, all of a sudden we had more information and more things to play with, because there were, you know what I mean, there's more at your fingertips to call on, which fed back into Millennium. Oh. And now it's like, and Stevie was saying this last night, that it's like you feel like a whole person, because now the entire life of the character is there. And before, it was, though we didn't know it, it was just half a life. Mm. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexandra, and I have a question for Stephen Spinella. Angels in America and your role in it are highly emotional. How do you keep from taking it home with you and burning out?
Good question. How do I keep from doing that?
No, keep from taking the emotions home with you once you leave.
I mean, to be completely honest, you do sort of take it home with you a little bit. I mean, I leave as much at the theater as I possibly can. You don't take home the tears so much, or the anger, or that sort of stuff. What you take home, I play a person with AIDS. What you take home, what you find starts permeating your life, are the issues of a person who is that sick. And when you're doing it 8 times a week, and and there are certain parallels with that character. I mean, I don't have AIDS, but there are other parallels. I mean, we're both gay men, and we both live in New York, and that sort of stuff. And so AIDS is an issue in my life. When there are those kind of parallels, those start invading. It's sort of invasive character to begin with, and you just try to be as sane as you possibly can, and recognize that this is the character, and this is my life, and I will leave this behind, and I will take this with me. And
I want to ask another question. How do you prepare for this emotion the next day? One part of the question is you've left it there in the theater, and then you come back the next day.
I mean, I actually...
Do you do any preparation for it?
I actually, every night, there's a book called Love Alone, 18 Elegies for Raj. It's a book of poems by Paul Monette that he wrote in the 6 months after his lover Roger died of AIDS. And every night before I go on stage, I read just to myself in my dressing room those poems, and they are, well, if you get a chance to read them, you should read them. They're extraordinary, and that's what I do. And then of course I think about the issues of the character, but that lets me, for me as an actor, the thing that I have to learn before I can go on stage every night is the seriousness of what I'm about to do. And that's the most important thing for me to do before I go on stage, is the seriousness of what I'm about to do.
Very important. Do you want to talk about that too?
Well, sure, if you'd like.
What do you do?
I'll embellish a little bit on it. I have to go out in my very first scene and lay down on a stretcher and die. And then the next time, and the audience really doesn't see it because it's a funeral and it's my funeral. I come back a half an hour later because the play goes back to the beginning on how this occurred. And we take the whole journey, and I start as a 7-year-old. So I have to go out, sort of put myself, and not really be in that mindset. It's all during that moment of lying there underneath a blanket and hearing the beginning of it that and the half hour before, because it's pretty chaotic. I have to take a half an hour alone and start to focus. And for me, in order for all the payoffs in the play as an actor and as the director and as all part of this unit that we do in telling this story, I have to bring as much joy and life and his innate energy and zest for life that this character has in the beginning, so that in the end, when he starts to go, it's another complete contrast and color. It allows us to see the arc, so that this guy who's so full of life gets all of it taken out of him. And I have to find, for me, the focus to where to start, so that I don't start too up here or too down here. And I think I do it innately in myself, but it really requires me just thinking about my journey.
Before we go to our next question, I'm going to thank Joe and Stephen for being here, and they're on their way to a rehearsal. And they've been playing the part and rehearsing. Do you want to just say goodbye and tell us what you're on your way to?
Well, I hope not a nightmare.
No.
We're rehearsing, I guess, the third act of Perestroika today. So. And the fifth.
And the fifth.
And at the same time, they're working in Angels in America, which is a wonderful play. Go fast.
My name is John Francis Fox, and my question is for Julie Harris. Since you are very well known for your one-woman plays, can you tell us the difference between acting in a one-character play and acting with other actors?
Well, I think that in a one-person play, the audience is your other support. You are engaging them in this particular story, and I never felt very lonely when I was doing a one-person play. And the Belle of Amherst, which was the first one, I just it was as if Emily Dickinson had invited someone to come to tea, and I, in the first place, it was very difficult because when she first comes on with the tea tray, I had a great director, Charles Nelson Riley, who made it all like a picnic and a circus. I just had to cut the cake, pour the tea, say, would you like sugar or lemon? And but the first moment was that I didn't know whether, I brought the tea out, and then I saw the person or the persons and thought, I don't think I can do this. I think I'll excuse myself. So that was my first impulse. And then when I made up my mind to stay and say, well, yes, and my name is this, and would you like some tea? And I make this kind of cake. And then one thing led to another, and it was just me and another person had come for tea. So I was telling them about my life. Like I would, we could be here all day. I would tell you about my brothers and my father and my mother and my aunts and my uncles and Christmas and New Year's and people dying and people being born and it was wonderful.
Thank you.
My name is Rebecca Gallegos, and my question is for Mr. Hyslop. Molanina is a very flamboyant character. What did you do for your audition?
Oh, God. I was playing the Phantom in Canada at the time, and Hal Prince was rehearsing Kiss in Toronto, up the street at the other theater, and he came down to see the first act of a matinee, and he said, "You've got to play this role." And I said, "Oh, sure." It's like, yeah, okay. So a month later, he flew me to New York for Kander and Ebb and Terrence McNally to see me. But meanwhile, they had faxed 27 pages of Molina's script and songs, and I had 3 days to learn it, and I learned all the material from the show. and then I did that material for them. I think the Broadhurst was about 47 degrees inside, and everybody was wearing their overcoats and running out to pee because it was so cold. And my wife Ruth was in the wings huddling with her coat on as well. And I did all the material from the show, and it was very exciting. And,
do you find auditioning hard?
Pardon me?
How do you find auditioning hard?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't do it well. I don't know anybody that really does.
I'm the worst.
Does audition well and then is really a good performer. Do you know what I mean? I think you either do one or the other.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Larry Weissman, and I'm an actor as well. This is for David, Jeff, and Petula. How is replacing an actor different from originating a part, especially after you've seen the other actor perform it?
Good. It's a very good question for, I think, all three of us, because of the... all three of us came into these productions here in New York and had rather large shoes to fill. Con O'Neill, who I replaced, originated this part in the West End, and I think he won the Olivier Award over there, and he was nominated for a Tony here. And I know Jeff came in and replaced Brent, who won the Tony. And I know that Petula also replaced Stephanie, who was nominated for a Tony. So this is the methodology is very simple. I came in here and had one job, and that is to stay within the confines of what David can do and not try to compete with another actor, even though innately I looked at his performance. I saw it twice. I stayed away from the theater purposely so that I didn't hear his inflections and try. I saw what he did, and it gave me a great advantage because I watched somebody who had been playing the role for 5 years who was so comfortable in it and who had so much confidence in himself doing it, who originally was born in Liverpool. So Liverpool was like, it off of his tongue and his lips. And I, being an American, had that obstacle to get over. And then knowing that, he had this sort of cult thing going for him, people rooting for an underdog, and here, they've hired me to come in here, and I'm a name, and, he can't act because he's from television, or, there's that stuff going on, and I had to forget about all of that. What I needed to do is just focus on the tools that I have, and that I am very much innately like this guy. There's so much of me, I have so much that embodies this character in me that I could never do what Con did. But Con can't do what I do. I can only be as good as David Cassidy can be, and not try and do somebody else's performance.
Jeff, do you want to add to that?
I agree totally. It's really what other people see the role as, and you're coming in and you're trying to live up to what those people, because they've seen Con and they've seen Brent and they've seen, and you're coming in and you're doing what you are capable of. And I think what we all can bring to a show, and I've seen Blood Brothers, and this is amazing, is that they've brought their own individuality and charisma, and that's something that maybe the other person didn't necessarily have. And I know what I've brought. I'm a very company person. I'm a company actor, and I love to bring everybody together, from the crew to the orchestra, to everybody at the front of house, so that we're all doing the same show every night, from the front of house to my job. And I think that's the difference. Well, that's my individual difference. Over to you.
I fought tooth and nail not to do this. Because I had seen the show in London. I've seen, and I saw it in New York, so I've seen three ladies play Mrs. Johnston. That's my role. And I thought they were all great, and I just had never pictured myself playing this role. I didn't think I could ever play Mrs. Johnston. She was so far from anything that I could understand. I'm also a mother, so I found the whole idea of this woman giving her child away very difficult to swallow. I mean, and it's still a difficult moment for me when I'm playing it. But now that once I'd taken the plunge and said I would do it, of course I was excited about doing Broadway. Stepping into somebody else's shoes was not easy for me. But now I feel that I do know Mrs. Johnston, and there's an awful lot of her in me, and every night I'm learning more about her. And in fact, there was a question that was asked earlier on in the discussion about what you take home. I'm finding out an awful lot about myself in this role. So I don't know if this is answering your question. I have never seen me play Mrs. Johnston, so I don't know how I compare with the other ladies, but I know that I'm giving it everything that I have. Whatever I have is being given night after night, and the music seems to fit my voice very well, and I'm just giving it all I've got every night. That's all I can do.
Okay. My name is Bob Green, and I have a question for David Cassidy and Petulia Clark. You've both been singers for many years. How do you maintain your voices?
Have you listened to me today? I have a particularly difficult problem. Thank you for asking. As actors or as singers, we're on the stage in the theater. It's your instrument. It's the way that one of the most important ways that we communicate what's going on. And in an emotional role and play as I'm in, I have to scream a lot. I have to play 7 in the beginning, which I probably couldn't do it now, but I took up here, and when you put your voice up here, it starts to, you have to actually, you thin your cords out. The short answer is, I vocalize a lot. I shut up as much as I can, and it becomes more and more difficult outside of the theater, outside of the play, 8 times a week. I have to try and baby my voice. It's difficult because if you get angry, or if you want to yell up the stairs, you can't. You got to go sort of limping up the stairs.
Absolutely.
How do you do it? How do you do it?
It's the talking that's the worst.
Yeah.
It's singing because you're supporting it. Hope is easy.
It's easy.
And you're singing with a sound system and with hopefully a sound system and
and you can place it.
And you place it. But when you're for me a lot, I talk with underscoring.
Right.
So you're pitching the voice over the underscoring because you think you have to. Really, you don't. But you think. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
That's where we talk like this. We're really tenors, but we're.
We have just room for one more question.
What are some of the differences between doing a show outside of New York as opposed to Broadway? Are there any differences?
Canada or London or
California?
Well, it's the most wonderful thrill being on Broadway. I was ready for the excitement and the nervousness of being here, but I wasn't ready for the warmth and the community feeling that I sense. It's like being embraced. It's
different from London, though, Petulia.
Yes, it is. Yes. It is, and don't get me wrong. I mean, London is my home, and I love it dearly. And I've worked on the London stage a fair amount, but it's not quite the same. There's something very close knit about Broadway, and there's no back scratching. There's no nastiness. It's beautiful. I'm very, very happy here, and I'm just having the most wonderful time in New York, and thanks to lovely people. Meeting you.
I'm afraid I have a standard phrase here. Forgive me for interrupting you, and forgive me for cutting this short. But we could go on and on because the performers that are at this seminar, the American Theatre Wing seminar, working in the theater on performance, are so talented and so caring and so giving of themselves that I, for one, would like to spend the day with all of them. And I'm sure that you would too, but time has come to an end and we have to close this. This is the American Theatre Wing seminar. There's but one of a series of seminars. We do one on the playwright and director, one on the production, and one on design. And they are all coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located on 42nd Street. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theatre Wing, and I'm very proud indeed to be able to bring the caliber of the type of people that we have brought to you as been represented in today's performance on the performance. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kentucky.
That's what I thought. I got it right there.
That's from Compton. Thanks.
Well directed.
Appreciate it.
Well directed.
Yeah.
That's correct. Okay, Unix.